Imagine waking up one morning and suddenly realizing that the person staring back at you in the mirror is a complete stranger. Not physically, the face is familiar, the features unchanged, but something deeper, something essential feels utterly foreign. You know your name, your job, your relationships, your daily routines, yet an unsettling question pierces through your consciousness like a blade. Who am I when no one is watching? Who am I when I strip away everything I think I should be? This isn't a philosophical exercise. This is the moment when the carefully constructed persona you've spent decades building begins to crack, revealing the terrifying possibility that you've been living someone else's life while your authentic self has been buried so deep you've forgotten it ever existed. Carl Jung called this awakening the beginning of individuation, the process by which you stop being who others want you to be and start becoming who you actually are. But here's the paradox that will haunt you. Most people spend their entire lives running from this moment. They would rather live as successful strangers to themselves than face the chaos of authentic self-discovery. Why? Because finding yourself isn't a gentle journey of self-improvement. It's a violent disruption of everything you thought you knew about reality, relationships, and your place in the world. It's the psychological equivalent of being born again, and birth is never painless. Consider this. Every morning, you wake up and put on a mask. Not literally, but psychologically. You become the version of yourself that your family expects, your colleagues need, your friends prefer. You speak the words that maintain harmony, pursue the goals that seem appropriate, suppress the desires that feel too dangerous or unconventional. You do this so automatically that you've forgotten it's even happening. But what if I told you that this mask isn't protecting you, it's suffocating you? What if the very thing you think is keeping you safe is actually keeping you from living? Jung understood something that most people never grasp. The self you present to the world is not your true self. It's what he called the persona, a psychological costume designed to help you navigate social situations and meet external expectations. The persona is necessary for functioning in society, but it becomes dangerous when you mistake it for your authentic identity. Here's where it gets disturbing. You might go your entire life without ever meeting your real self. You might die having lived someone else's dreams, loved according to someone else's definition of love, and achieved success by someone else's standards. You might spend decades feeling vaguely empty, restless, or dissatisfied without ever understanding why. The emptiness you feel isn't depression, it's your soul crying out for recognition. The restlessness isn't anxiety, it's your authentic self trying to break free from the prison of social conditioning. The dissatisfaction isn't ingratitude, it's your psyche's way of telling you that you're living a lie. But here's the most unsettling part. This realization usually comes at the worst possible time. It arrives when you're supposedly successful, when your life looks perfect from the outside, when you have everything you thought you wanted. Jung noticed that many of his patients came to him not because their lives were falling apart, but because their lives were perfectly assembled, and yet they felt like they were dying inside. This is what he called the successful failure, the person who has achieved everything society told them to want, only to discover that none of it belongs to them. They've climbed the ladder only to realize it was leaning against the wrong wall. The question that emerges from this recognition is both simple and terrifying. If you're not who you think you are, then who are you? And if you've been living someone else's life, what would your authentic life actually look like? Most people, when faced with this question, retreat immediately. They bury themselves deeper in their personas, add more layers to their masks, pursue more external validation to drown out the voice of their authentic self. They choose the familiar prison of false identity over the uncertain freedom of self-discovery. But what if Jung was right? What if life doesn't truly begin until you find yourself? What if everything you've experienced so far has been merely preparation for the moment when you finally meet who you really are? This isn't about self-improvement or optimization. This isn't about becoming a better version of who you already are. This is about discovering that who you think you are might be completely wrong, and that the person you actually are is waiting to be born. The journey ahead will demand everything from you. It will require you to question every assumption, challenge every belief, and face every fear you've been avoiding. It will ask you to sacrifice the comfortable lie for the uncomfortable truth. But if you're willing to take this journey, if you're ready to meet the stranger in the mirror and discover that they're not a stranger at all, they're the person you were always meant to be, then you're about to discover what it means to truly live. The question isn't whether you're ready for this journey. The question is, can you afford not to take it? The trap was set long before you were born. It was waiting for you in the hospital room where you took your first breath, woven into the fabric of every expectation your parents had for your life. It was there in your first day of school, in every gold star you received for good behavior, and every time you were praised for being such a good child. The trap wasn't malicious, it was love wrapped in the chains of social conditioning. Jung discovered that the persona begins forming in early childhood as a survival mechanism. The child quickly learns that certain behaviors earn approval, love, and safety, while others bring rejection, punishment, or abandonment. This isn't conscious manipulation, it's the deepest human instinct at work. The child's psyche creates a psychological shield, a false self that can navigate the dangerous waters of social expectations while protecting the vulnerable, authentic self beneath. But here's where Jung's insight becomes truly disturbing. What starts as protection becomes a prison. The persona that once saved you from rejection now prevents you from connection. The mask that earned you love now blocks you from being loved for who you truly are. You've become so skilled at being what others need that you've forgotten what you need. Friedrich Nietzsche saw this same phenomenon from a different angle. He wrote about the herd mentality, the way individuals sacrifice their authentic nature to belong to the group. Society, he argued, is fundamentally hostile to the individual. It demands conformity, punishes difference, and rewards mediocrity. The person who dares to be authentic threatens the comfortable illusions that keep the herd together. Consider how this plays out in your own life. When was the last time you expressed an opinion that might genuinely upset someone you care about? When did you last pursue a dream that others might consider impractical or selfish? When did you last allow yourself to feel anger, sadness, or desire without immediately trying to fix, hide, or justify it? The persona doesn't just hide your authentic self from others, it hides your authentic self from you. You've become so identified with the mask that you've forgotten there's a face underneath. Jung called this psychological unconsciousness, and he believed it was the root of most human suffering. Arthur Schopenhauer understood this suffering intimately. He wrote that most people are driven by what he called the will, blind, unconscious forces that push them toward goals they don't actually want, relationships that don't fulfill them, and achievements that leave them empty. They mistake these external drives for their own desires, never realizing they're being puppeted by forces beyond their awareness. This is why success can feel so hollow. You've achieved everything you thought you wanted, but you achieved it for the wrong reasons. You've lived someone else's definition of a good life while your authentic self has been starving in the shadows. But the tragedy goes deeper than personal dissatisfaction. When you live from your persona instead of your authentic self, you're not just betraying yourself, you're betraying everyone around you. Your relationships become transactions between masks rather than connections between souls. Your love becomes conditional performance rather than authentic expression. Your work becomes obligation rather than calling. Jung observed that this inauthenticity creates what he called neurosis, a split between who you are and who you think you should be. The psyche rebels against this split, manifesting as anxiety, depression, addiction, or what he termed the general neurosis of our time. Your symptoms aren't defects, they're messages from your authentic self, desperately trying to get your attention. Jean-Paul Sartre took this insight even further. He argued that we are condemned to be free, that every moment of every day, we're choosing who to be. But most people experience this freedom as a crushing burden. They would rather be told who to be than face the terrifying responsibility of authentic choice. They choose bad faith, pretending they have no choice, that their persona is their only option. This bad faith becomes a self-perpetuating cycle. The more you deny your authentic self, the more frightening it becomes. The longer you live behind the mask, the more convinced you become that there's nothing real underneath. You start to believe that the persona is all there is, that authenticity is a luxury you can't afford, that finding yourself is selfish self-indulgence. Society reinforces this belief at every turn. From childhood through adulthood, you're rewarded for conformity and punished for authenticity. The education system teaches you to give the right answers, not to ask the right questions. The workplace rewards you for fitting in, not for standing out. Relationships often become negotiations about who will sacrifice their authenticity to maintain harmony. But Jung made a revolutionary observation. The very forces that created your persona also created your authentic self. The same psychological mechanisms that learn to hide your true nature also remember what that nature is. The same unconscious that protects you from authenticity also yearns for it. This is why the midlife crisis is so common and so devastating. It's not about age. It's about the moment when the persona can no longer contain the authentic self. The mask begins to crack, and the person underneath starts demanding recognition. This isn't a breakdown, it's a breakthrough. It's your psyche's last desperate attempt to course correct before it's too late. The question that emerges from this understanding is profound. If your persona was created to protect you, but now it's imprisoning you, how do you safely remove the mask without losing yourself entirely? How do you distinguish between who you really are and who you've been conditioned to be? The answer lies in understanding that authenticity isn't about destroying your persona, it's about integrating it. It's about becoming conscious of the mask so you can choose when to wear it and when to set it aside. It's about reclaiming your right to be complex, contradictory, and beautifully human. But this integration comes with a price that most people aren't willing to pay. It requires you to face everything you've been avoiding about yourself and your life. It demands that you take responsibility for choices you've been making unconsciously. It asks you to risk losing the approval of others in order to gain approval from yourself. This is where the real work begins, not in understanding the problem, but in having the courage to do something about it. The most insidious aspect of living behind a mask is how seamlessly it weaves itself into every fiber of your existence. You don't just wear your persona when you're performing for others. It becomes the lens through which you see reality itself. Your authentic self doesn't just hide from the world. It becomes invisible to you. Think about the last time you made a major life decision. Did you pause to ask yourself what you genuinely wanted, or did you automatically calculate what others expected? When you chose your career, your partner, your lifestyle, were you responding to an inner calling or an outer pressure? Most people discover, with horrifying clarity, that they can't tell the difference anymore. The voice of authenticity has been silent for so long that they've forgotten what it sounds like. This is what Jung called psychological unconsciousness, a state where you're so identified with your persona that you lose access to your genuine thoughts, feelings, and desires. You become a stranger to yourself, operating on autopilot, going through the motions of a life that feels increasingly hollow and meaningless. But the consequences reach far beyond personal dissatisfaction. When you live from your persona, you unconsciously teach everyone around you to do the same. Your children learn to hide their authentic selves by watching you hide yours. Your relationships become elaborate dances of mutual deception, where everyone pretends to be someone they're not to maintain the illusion of connection. Consider your closest relationships. How often do you find yourself saying what you think the other person wants to hear rather than what you actually think? How frequently do you modify your behavior to avoid conflict, even when that conflict might lead to deeper understanding? You've probably created a web of relationships where everyone is performing for everyone else, and nobody knows who anybody really is. This creates what psychologists call emotional labor, the exhausting work of constantly managing your image and others' emotions. You spend enormous amounts of energy monitoring how others perceive you, adjusting your behavior in real time to maintain their approval. It's like being on stage 24/7, never able to relax into your authentic self. The neurological cost of this constant performance is staggering. Your brain is working overtime to maintain the persona, suppress authentic impulses, and manage the cognitive dissonance between who you are and who you're pretending to be. This chronic stress manifests as anxiety, depression, fatigue, and a host of physical symptoms that modern medicine treats as separate problems rather than symptoms of existential inauthenticity. But perhaps the most devastating consequence is what Jung called the unlived life, the dreams you never pursued, the words you never spoke, the person you never became. Every day you spend living someone else's life is a day stolen from your authentic self. Every moment you choose safety over truth, you're building a prison of missed opportunities and unexpressed potential. The shadow side of this personas is even more disturbing. Jung observed that everything you deny about yourself doesn't disappear, it goes underground, into what he called the shadow. The parts of yourself you've deemed unacceptable, the desires you've suppressed, the emotions you've denied, they all accumulate in your unconscious, growing stronger and more distorted with each passing year. This shadow doesn't just contain your negative traits, it contains your authentic power, your creative potential, your capacity for genuine love and connection. When you reject parts of yourself to maintain your persona, you don't just lose your darkness, you lose your light. You become a diminished version of who you could be, living a half-life of muted experiences and dampened possibilities. The really tragic part is how this inauthenticity becomes self-perpetuating. The longer you live behind the mask, the more convinced you become that the mask is all there is. You start to believe that your authentic self is selfish, unrealistic, or dangerous. You develop elaborate justifications for why you can't be who you really are, responsibilities, obligations, the needs of others. But these justifications are often just sophisticated forms of self-betrayal. You're not protecting others by hiding your authentic self. You're depriving them of the gift of knowing who you really are. You're not being responsible by living someone else's life. You're being cowardly. The consequence extends into every area of your life. Your work becomes a performance rather than an expression of your gifts. Your creativity gets channeled into maintaining your image rather than creating something meaningful. Your relationships become transactional exchanges rather than authentic connections. Your spiritual life becomes about following rules rather than discovering truth. Even your relationship with time becomes distorted. You find yourself constantly busy but never fulfilled, always doing but never being. You're so focused on maintaining your persona that you forget to live. Days blur into weeks, weeks into years, and you wake up one day wondering where your life went. This is what Thoreau meant when he wrote that most men lead lives of quiet desperation. It's not that their lives are objectively terrible, it's that they're living someone else's life while their authentic self withers away, unexpressed and unrecognized. The most heartbreaking part is watching people on their deathbeds, finally free from the pressure to maintain their personas, express regret not for what they did wrong, but for what they never allowed themselves to be. They mourn the authentic life they never lived, the real self they never knew, the truth they never had the courage to speak. But here's what makes this tragedy even more poignant. None of it is necessary. The persona that feels so essential, so protective, so permanent, it's actually just a habit. A deeply ingrained, unconscious habit, but a habit nonetheless. And habits can be changed. The prison you've built around your authentic self isn't made of steel. It's made of beliefs, fears, and assumptions that can be questioned and transformed. The mask you've been wearing isn't your face. It's a costume you can choose to remove. But removal requires something most people aren't prepared to give. The willingness to feel everything you've been avoiding, to face everything you've been denying, to become everything you've been afraid to be. This is where the real journey begins, not in understanding why you're trapped, but in finding the courage to break free. The moment you decide to reclaim your authentic self, you're declaring war on everything that has kept you small, safe, and suffocated. This isn't a gentle process of self-improvement. It's a revolutionary act of psychological rebellion that will challenge every assumption you've made about who you are and who you're supposed to be. Jung called this process individuation, the journey toward becoming who you truly are rather than who you've been conditioned to be. But don't mistake this for a comfortable path of self-discovery. Individuation is psychological warfare against the forces that have colonized your psyche. It requires you to become a traitor to your own limitations. The first weapon in this rebellion is what Jung called making the unconscious conscious. You must begin to see your persona not as your identity, but as a tool you've been unconsciously wielding. Start paying attention to the moments when you feel yourself performing rather than being. Notice when you're about to say something because it's expected rather than because it's true. Catch yourself in the act of betraying your authentic impulses. This awareness is uncomfortable because it reveals how much of your life has been automatic, how many of your choices haven't really been choices at all. You'll discover that conversations you thought were authentic were actually scripted performances. Relationships you believed were genuine were elaborate negotiations between masks. Dreams you thought were yours were actually borrowed from others. But awareness alone isn't enough. You must develop what Jung called active imagination, the ability to dialogue with the parts of yourself you've been suppressing. This means learning to listen to the voice of your authentic self, even when it's saying things your persona finds threatening or inappropriate. Try this. Sit quietly and ask yourself what you would do if you knew you couldn't fail and no one would judge you. The answer that emerges, the one that probably terrifies you, that's your authentic self speaking. The voice that immediately argues why it's impossible, irresponsible, or selfish, that's your persona fighting back. The rebellion requires you to start choosing your authentic impulses over your conditioned responses, even in small ways. If you usually say, "I'm fine," when you're not, try saying, "I'm struggling." If you typically agree to avoid conflict, try expressing your genuine opinion. If you normally hide your excitement to appear sophisticated, try letting your enthusiasm show. These small acts of authenticity are like flexing a muscle you haven't used in years. It will feel awkward, dangerous, even wrong. Your persona will flood you with anxiety, warning you that you're about to be rejected, abandoned, or criticized. This is normal. The persona's job is to keep you safe, and authenticity feels like mortal danger to a psychological system built on hiding. But here's what Jung discovered. The very thing your persona fears most, rejection for being yourself, is actually the gateway to genuine connection. When you stop performing and start being, you give others permission to do the same. You break the spell of mutual deception that has been keeping everyone trapped in shallow relationships. Consider the example of people who've survived near-death experiences. They often report that facing mortality stripped away their personas entirely, revealing what truly mattered to them. They stopped caring about social approval and started caring about authentic expression. They quit jobs that didn't fulfill them, left relationships that weren't genuine, and began pursuing what their souls actually wanted. You don't need to have a near-death experience to access this clarity. You need to have what Jung called a symbolic death, a conscious letting go of the false self you've been maintaining. This means grieving the person you thought you were supposed to be so you can become the person you actually are. The rebellion also requires you to reclaim your shadow, all the parts of yourself you've disowned in service of your persona. This doesn't mean acting out destructively, but rather integrating your full range of human experience. If you've been overly nice, you need to reclaim your capacity for healthy anger. If you've been excessively rational, you need to reconnect with your emotions. If you've been perfectly controlled, you need to embrace your wild, spontaneous nature. Shadow work is dangerous because it means accepting that you're more complex than your persona allows. You're not just good or bad, light or dark. You're a full spectrum of human possibility. The persona wants you to be simple, predictable, and safe. Your authentic self is complicated, unpredictable, and alive. This integration process will likely disturb the people around you. They've grown comfortable with your persona and may resist your attempts to be authentic. Some relationships won't survive your transformation. They were built on mutual inauthenticity and can't handle the truth of who you really are. This is painful but necessary. You're not responsible for maintaining relationships that require you to betray yourself. The rebellion reaches its crescendo when you realize that you've been seeking approval from people who don't even know who you are. You've been trying to be loved for a performance while your authentic self has been starving for recognition. The moment you stop performing and start being, you discover whether your relationships are based on genuine connection or convenient illusion. But here's the paradox that will transform everything. The more authentically you live, the more you realize that you never needed anyone's approval in the first place. The validation you've been desperately seeking from others was always available from within. You've been begging for permission to be yourself from people who have no authority to grant it. This rebellion isn't selfish, it's necessary. A world full of people living authentically would be a world of genuine connection, creative expression, and meaningful contribution. Your personal liberation becomes a gift to everyone around you because it shows them what's possible. The path forward isn't about destroying your persona, but about becoming its conscious master rather than its unconscious slave. You learn to wear the mask when it serves you and remove it when it doesn't. You become fluid, adaptive, and real. But this mastery comes with a price and a promise that will redefine everything you thought you knew about what it means to be alive. The ultimate truth isn't what you think it is. It's not about finding some hidden, perfect version of yourself that's been waiting to be discovered. It's not about uncovering a predetermined destiny or fulfilling some cosmic purpose. The ultimate truth is far more radical, far more liberating, and far more terrifying than any of that. The ultimate truth is this: there is no fixed self to find. Jung's greatest insight wasn't that you have an authentic self hiding beneath your persona. It's that you have the power to consciously create who you are. This self you've been searching for isn't a treasure buried in your psyche waiting to be unearthed. It's a work of art that you're painting with every choice you make, every moment you choose consciousness over unconsciousness, every time you pick authenticity over performance. This realization is simultaneously the most liberating and most terrifying truth you'll ever encounter. It means you're not trapped by your past, your conditioning, or your circumstances. But it also means you can't blame your past, your conditioning, or your circumstances for who you've become. You are the author of your own existence, and you've been writing the story all along. You just weren't conscious of holding the pen. When Jung said, "Life begins when you find yourself," he wasn't talking about discovering a pre-existing self. He was talking about the moment you realize you have the power to consciously choose who you become. The moment you stop being a passive victim of your conditioning and start being an active creator of your identity. This is what he meant by the transcendent function, the psychological process by which you integrate all the opposing forces within yourself into a conscious, creative whole. You don't resolve the tension between your persona and your shadow by choosing one over the other. You transcend it by becoming large enough to contain both, conscious enough to choose which aspects serve you in any given moment. Think about what this means for your life. Every relationship you've ever had, every career choice you've made, every dream you've pursued or abandoned, all of it has been part of the process of creating who you are. Not discovering, creating. The pain you've experienced wasn't punishment for being wrong, it was information about what doesn't work. The joy you felt wasn't a reward for being right, it was confirmation of what does work. You are not a problem to be solved. You are a mystery to be lived. You are not a machine to be optimized. You are a creative force to be expressed. You are not a role to be played. You are a story to be written. This understanding transforms everything. Your mistakes become experiments. Your failures become feedback. Your struggles become the raw material for your becoming. Nothing is wasted because everything is part of the process of conscious self-creation. But here's the part that will challenge everything you thought you knew about personal growth. You don't become authentic by getting rid of your persona. You become authentic by choosing your persona consciously. The mask isn't the enemy, unconsciousness is the enemy. When you wear your persona without awareness, you're trapped by it. When you choose your persona consciously, you're empowered by it. This is why Jung emphasized that individuation isn't about becoming perfect, it's about becoming whole. Wholeness includes everything: your light and your shadow, your strength and your vulnerability, your wisdom and your foolishness. You don't transcend your humanity, you embrace it fully. The people who truly found themselves aren't those who've eliminated their contradictions, they're those who've learned to dance with them. They're not consistent in their behavior, they're consistent in their consciousness. They don't always make the right choices, they make conscious choices. This is the secret that transforms your entire relationship with life. You don't have to be perfect to be authentic. You don't have to have it all figured out to be whole. You don't have to be fearless to be courageous. You just have to be conscious. When you realize that you're the author of your own existence, every moment becomes an opportunity to write a new chapter. Every conversation becomes a chance to express something true. Every choice becomes an act of self-creation. Every day becomes a canvas on which you can paint the masterpiece of your becoming. This is why Jung insisted that the process of individuation never ends. You don't arrive at authenticity, you practice it. You don't achieve wholeness, you choose it, moment by moment, choice by choice. Life becomes not a problem to be solved, but a dance to be danced. The ultimate truth is that you are both the sculptor and the sculpture, the writer and the story, the artist and the art. You are not finding yourself, you are creating yourself. You are not becoming who you were meant to be, you are becoming who you choose to be. This is the moment when life truly begins. Not when you discover who you are, but when you realize you have the power to consciously choose who you become. Not when you find your authentic self, but when you understand that authenticity is not a destination but a way of traveling. The person staring back at you in the mirror isn't a stranger after all. They're the co-creator of your existence, waiting for you to pick up the pen and start writing the next chapter of your story. They're not asking you to find yourself, they're asking you to create yourself. And that creation begins now, with this breath, with this choice, with this moment of recognition that you are both the question and the answer, the seeker and the sought, the one who is lost and the one who does the finding. Life begins when you realize you're not looking for yourself, you're creating yourself. And that creation is the most beautiful, terrifying, and magnificent responsibility you'll ever have. The question isn't who you are. The question is, who will you choose to become?